Have you ever found a folder that proved someone had been watching you long before you ever noticed? I found mine in a locked drawer at my in-laws' lake house looking for spare batteries during a power outage, the kind of ordinary, forgettable errand that has no business turning into the moment your whole marriage gets recontextualized. Inside, surveillance photos of me. Dozens of them. Me at the coffee shop near my old apartment. Me walking into a doctor's office 6 months ago, an address I'd never once mentioned to anyone in Emmett's family. Time-stamped typed logs underneath each one formatted like a professional report because it was one. I'm Vera. I'm 31. And this is the story of how my mother-in-law paid a private investigator to document my life for years, starting I'd later find out before I was even engaged to her son. Emmett and I built a good ordinary life together in the years since a townhouse with a garden he actually keeps alive. Unlike me movie nights, that always end with him falling asleep before the credits. A running joke about who left dishes in the sink that's been going for so long, neither of us remembers who started it. I would have told you without hesitation that I understood exactly what kind of family I'd married into. I didn't understand nearly enough of it, it turns out, not the part that mattered most. I work as a forensic accountant tracing fraud for a living, following money through shell accounts matching invoices to actual services rendered, finding the exact point where a paper trail stops telling the truth. I've spent my whole career reading other people's financial records for the story, hiding underneath the numbers sitting across from executives and small business owners who swore up and down their books were clean, right up until I showed them the line item that said otherwise. I never once expected to find my own name buried in somebody else's paper trail, formatted the same careful way I format my own case files. Same clinical tone, same time-stamped precision, just pointed somewhere I never imagined it would be. Emmett and I had been married 3 years together, 5. He's an architect, quiet in the specific way people mistake for shy until they actually get to know him, deeply loyal, the kind of man who still writes actual birthday cards instead of just texting, always a full paragraph, never just a signature. His mother, Paulette, had always been warm toward me in a slightly formal, slightly watchful way I'd chalked up to her personality rather than anything more deliberate. She hosted every holiday. She remembered every allergy. She was on the surface exactly the mother-in-law you'd hope for. The night I met her at an engagement dinner 2 years before the wedding, she'd held both my hands across the table and said warmly, "I like to know everything about the people I love. That's just how I show I care." I remember thinking at the time what a lovely old-fashioned sentiment that was, the kind of thing you'd expect from someone raised to believe closeness and vigilance were basically the same instinct. I had no idea yet how literally thoroughly professionally she meant it. I didn't open the whole folder that first night at the lake house. I found the drawer locked, pried it open more out of frustration with the power outage than actual suspicion, and when I saw what was inside, I closed it again, almost immediately, telling myself there had to be an ordinary explanation. Old photos from a family event, maybe misfiled somewhere they shouldn't be. I put the drawer back exactly as I'd found it, and didn't say anything to Emmett that weekend. Not that trip, not for weeks after, not until I had something more solid than a strange feeling to bring to him. That's the thing nobody tells you about betrayal like this. The first glimpse of it is always small enough, strange enough that your brain reaches for the boring explanation first, because the real one is too disorienting to hold on to right away. I actually mentioned the drawer to Emmett once weeks later in the most casual way I could manage. "Hey, did you know there's a locked drawer at the lake house?" Testing the water before I said anything real. He shrugged and said he had no idea his mom kept all sorts of odds and ends locked up out there, tax documents and old photo negatives and things like that. I let that be the end of it. It was easier than the alternative, and I wanted easier badly for a little while longer. The complicating moment came a few weeks later at a family birthday dinner when Paulette mentioned almost in passing that she'd run into an old acquaintance who did background work for families, her words delivered lightly like she was talking about a caterer. "You can never be too careful about who your children bring into the family," she said, laughing a little, glancing at me with what I read at the time as affectionate teasing. Everyone at the table laughed along. I laughed too. I had no idea yet that the acquaintance she was casually referencing over cake was the exact person whose name was typed at the bottom of every report sitting in that drawer. I need you to understand something before I keep going because it matters for everything after this. I didn't start pulling on this thread because I stopped trusting Emmett, or because I went looking for a reason to distrust his family. I started because a woman who spends her career noticing when a paper trail doesn't match the story it's supposed to tell cannot leave a locked drawer full of her own photographed life sitting unexamined for very long, no matter how badly she wants to believe the boring explanation. I want to be honest about how long I actually let that drawer sit unexamined once I found it. A full month. I told myself I was giving Paulette the benefit of the doubt, but really, I think I was giving myself time to keep believing the version of my life where nothing underneath it had shifted. The escalation didn't come in order. It came in pieces out of sequence the way real evidence actually surfaces instead of the way it does in a story someone's cleaned up afterward. I went back to the lake house alone the next month, telling Emmett I wanted a quiet weekend to catch up on work, and photographed every single page in that drawer with my phone before I let myself really look at any of it closely. The house was completely silent, except for the lake outside, water lapping at the dock in a steady, patient rhythm that felt almost mocking against what I was doing at that kitchen table. The most recent reports were from just 8 months earlier. My commute, my gym schedule, a lunch with a coworker, all logged with dates and times, and short-typed summaries, professional and clinical, the same tone I use in my own audit reports. I sat with the photos on my laptop for 3 straight nights, before I let myself dig into the older ones working backward through the stack, the way I'd sort a messy case file, most recent, first, oldest, last, building the timeline in reverse. I remember the second night specifically sitting at our kitchen table long after Emmett had gone to bed, the house dark, except for the laptop screen feeling less like a wife looking through old photos, and more like an auditor sitting alone with a file she already suspected was going to end badly. The reports thinned out the further back I went, less frequent, less detailed, until I hit a folder dated nearly 6 years back. 6 years ago, Emmett and I had been dating for exactly 4 months. We weren't engaged. We weren't even close to it. And there was already a report with my name on it dated from that exact period, cataloging where I worked, who my previous boyfriend had been, and a line that stopped my breath entirely. Subject has no record of prior legal or financial issues found. Recommend continued monitoring. I need you to know something before I go further because it recontextualizes everything I've told you up to here. Paulette hadn't just gotten cautious once things got serious. She'd started digging into me before Emmett had ever said the word girlfriend out loud to his own mother back when I was, as far as I understood it, just someone he'd been on a handful of dates with. I sat with that particular date for a long time doing the math over and over, hoping I'd get a different answer if I just recalculated it enough times. I never did. 4 months in, a whole professional report sitting in a drawer before Emmett himself would have even called me his girlfriend to a stranger at a party. I told my coworker Zainab about it eventually over lunch in the vaguest terms I could manage, framing it as a strange hypothetical question about a friend of a friend. She didn't buy the hypothetical framing for a second. We've worked fraud cases together long enough that she knows exactly what my voice sounds like when I'm describing a real file instead of a made-up one. Pull the payment trail, she said, without missing a beat. Whoever did this got paid somehow. Money leaves a much better trail than people do. It was good advice, and it was advice I already knew how to follow professionally. I just hadn't thought to point it at my own family yet. I pulled up years of the shared family credit statements Emmett and I had access to through a joint account Paulette had insisted on setting up early in our marriage for emergencies. She'd said another detail I now understood completely differently. Buried among landscaping charges and holiday catering was a recurring payment going back 6 full years to something called Beaumont Discrete Services, LLC, never a large amount at once, small enough to slide past casual notice, consistent enough that once I finally saw the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. It's a strange, sick feeling recognizing your own professional instincts working perfectly on a fraud that had been sitting inside your own family the entire time. I've flagged that exact kind of small, consistent, easy-to-miss recurring charge in dozens of cases over the years, always somebody else's family, somebody else's file. It had genuinely never once occurred to me to run that same eye over my own life. I drove to the county business registry myself the following week, sat in my car in the lot for almost 10 minutes before I went in. Not because I was scared exactly, but because I wanted to be completely sure of every date before I let this become real. I've built enough fraud cases to know you don't walk into a conversation like the one I was about to have on a hunch. You walk in with something that can survive somebody trying to argue with it. Inside the registry confirmed it in about 90 seconds. Beaumont Discrete Services, LLC, a licensed private investigation firm registered to a Roscoe Beaumont. 6 years of payments, 6 years of reports, 6 years of my ordinary unremarkable life cataloged by a stranger. My mother-in-law was paying to watch me. I sat in that lobby a moment longer than I needed to, holding the printout, thinking about every family dinner where Paulette had asked me warm, ordinary questions about my week, already knowing more of the answer than I did, nodding along like my life was still news to her. I brought it all to the lake house the following weekend, the same house where I'd found the drawer in the first place, timing it deliberately, so I wasn't confronting anyone in front of a room full of people who had no idea what they were about to hear. Paulette was in the kitchen when I walked in, folder in hand, the same kitchen where she'd taught me her stuffing recipe 2 Thanksgivings earlier, both of us laughing about how much sage was too much sage. "How long?" I asked. 2 words. Nothing more, not yet. She turned around, saw the folder, and I watched every bit of color leave her face at once. For a moment, she didn't breathe at all. I actually noticed it, the specific stillness of someone holding their breath, because exhaling feels like it would make whatever's coming next unavoidable. Her hand still resting on the edge of the counter didn't move at all either, like even that small motion felt too risky to attempt. When she finally did breathe again, it came out shaky, uneven, like she'd forgotten how for a second. "Since before you and Emmett were serious," she said, finally quiet. "I know how that sounds." "I do. You had someone photograph me at a doctor's appointment, Paulette, 6 months ago. I never told a single person in this family where that appointment even was." She sank into a kitchen chair, breath still unsteady, and for a long moment didn't say anything at all. When she finally spoke again, her voice had dropped almost to a whisper. "Emmett's brother married a woman 11 years ago who seemed perfect too. Charming, warm, wonderful with the family. She drained his accounts over 3 years before any of us understood what was happening, and by the time we did, it had cost this family more than money. It cost us him in a lot of ways. He's still not the same person he was before her." I told myself I was never going to sit back and watch that happen to Emmett too. I told myself checking was love. I think somewhere along the way I stopped being able to tell the difference between checking and never being able to stop. I stood there, listening, folder still in my hands, watching a woman I'd genuinely loved for years try to explain something that didn't have a clean explanation. Some part of me wanted badly to just accept the story and let it end there. Another part of me kept doing the math. 11 years since the brothers' divorce, 6 years of my own surveillance file, 5 years since our own wedding, and none of it fully closed the gap between a mother's fear and a decision to keep paying someone to photograph her son's girlfriend on ordinary Tuesdays for the better part of a decade. For 1 second, just one, I saw exactly why she'd done it. A woman so scarred by watching one son get quietly destroyed by someone who seemed safe that she'd decided the only way to protect the other one was to never fully trust anyone again, regardless of what they'd actually done to earn that trust. And then that second passed, and I was just standing in a kitchen holding 6 years of my own photographed life, looking at a woman who'd let me build a marriage inside a surveillance file she never once mentioned. I want to tell you it ended there clean and complete in that kitchen. It didn't. What ended there was the version of Paulette I was willing to extend automatic trust to without asking harder questions. What came after took much longer, and some of it is still unfolding. It wasn't until almost 3 weeks later that Emmett told me the rest of what he'd learned once he'd had his own difficult conversation with his mother. Beaumont the investigator had apparently tried to quietly wind down the arrangement himself almost a year earlier. An email Emmett found buried in an old family inbox Paulette had once shared access to, where Beaumont wrote that continuing to monitor a family member with zero indication of any wrongdoing raised ethical concerns for his firm and recommended she stop. Emmett read me that email out loud over the phone, his voice tight in a way I'd never heard from him before. Even the guy she was paying to do this told her to stop, he said. And she just found a workaround instead of an ending. I could hear how much that particular detail was costing him to say out loud, a son having to reckon with exactly how deliberate his own mother's choices had been, past the point of any reasonable doubt about her intentions. She'd switched to paying him in a way that left less of a digital trail after that, which was the reason the most recent reports had grown sparser and vaguer, not because the surveillance had actually slowed down, but because she'd gotten better at hiding that it hadn't. That detail landed harder than almost anything else. It wasn't a story about a mother who'd made one fearful decision years ago and never revisited it. It was a story about a woman who'd been told plainly by the very person she'd hired that what she was doing had crossed a line and had chosen to keep going anyway, just more carefully. Paulette, if you're ever watching this and some part of me thinks you will be because you never did like not knowing how a story ended, I need you to hear this part directly. I understand what happened to this family before I was in it. I understand what it did to you watching it happen to someone you love. What I can't make myself understand is choosing over and over for 6 straight years to keep documenting me instead of ever once just asking me a single honest question yourself. You told me at that first dinner that you like to know everything about the people you love. That's just how you show you care. I've thought about that sentence more times than I can count since finding that drawer. You did learn everything about me, Paulette. You just never once learned it the way real family does, by asking and trusting the answer. Emmett and I are still working through what trust looks like now inside a family where checking on you apparently had a price tag and a case number attached to it the whole time. We've set new boundaries around the lake house, around shared accounts, around what family is actually allowed to mean going forward, conversations that are slow and uncomfortable and necessary in roughly equal measure. Some days that feels manageable. Other days I still catch myself glancing toward that lake house drawer in my mind, wondering what else might still be locked inside it that nobody's found yet. I went back once more a few weeks after everything came out, just to look at that drawer empty for myself. Emmett had cleared it out completely, every photo, every report, every folder boxed up and handed over to a lawyer to figure out what, if anything, could actually be done about it legally. Standing there in front of an empty drawer that used to hold 6 years of my own life without my knowledge, I expected to feel some kind of relief. Mostly, I just felt tired, the specific exhaustion of finally putting down something heavy you didn't know you'd been carrying the whole time. I think about that 4 months in report more than any of the others, honestly. Not the recent ones, not the doctor's office photo, not even the ones from our wedding day. Just that first one filed before Emmett had even called me his girlfriend out loud. Proof that from the very beginning, before I'd done a single thing to earn suspicion, someone had already decided I needed watching. I don't know how you fully get past knowing that. I'm still finding out.